In the town of Cavite, Viejo, province of Cavite, this 12th day of June 1898, Acta de la Proclamación de la Independencia del Pueblo Filipino.
Once again, a pleasant morning, everyone. I, Rosemary Gargarita, together with my partners, Mandaline Compania and Roslyn Yanson, are your reporters for this morning. Our report is all about the Act of Proclamation of the Independence of the Philippine people. But first, let me have some overture of the important historical events before we claim our independence or the Philippine independence. The Philippine Revolution is one of the most important events in the country's history, awakening a proud sense of nationalism for generations of Filipinos to come. In period of heavy struggle and conflict, Filipinos of different backgrounds united with a common goal, that is, to resist colonialism. The revolution against Spain was sparked in 1896 after Spanish authorities discovered the Katipunan, a Filipino revolutionary society plotting against their colonizers. Andres Bonifacio was the supreme of the Katipunan, or it was also known as Kataas-taasan, Kagalang-galangang Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, or in English, the highest and most venerated association of the sons and daughters of the land. After the discovery of the Katipunan, Spanish authority made several arrests to identify the members. Bonifacio and his fellows were planning a nationwide revolt. This led to an event called Cry of Bugadlawin, where revolutionaries took part in a mass steering of cédulas, or the community tax certificates, symbolizing the fight against Spain. They came up with a pact that called for an end to the revolution, which was known as the Pact of Biak na Bato, which was positively favored by the Spanish Governor-General Fernando Primo de Rivera. The pact's agenda included the surrender of weapons to revolutionaries, amnesty, exile for leaders, and payment to the revolutionaries worth $400,000. And so, General Emilio Aguinaldo was exiled in Hong Kong. While he was in Hong Kong, he watched closely the developments in the Philippines and kept the money for future struggle against Spain. And his compatriots designed what is today the Philippine national flag. The Spanish-American War in 1898 eventually changed Philippine history. After the Americans won the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898, Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines with their help and announced the resumption of the revolution against Spain. After winning several victories against the Spaniards, he declared Philippine independence on June 12, 1898. The Treaty of Paris ending the Spanish-American War was signed on December 10, 1898. In it, Spain ceded Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States and transferred sovereignty over the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. You see how cruel the Spanish were. But even so, acceding to the terms of the Pact of Biak na Bato, the Spanish would give self-rule to the Philippines within 3 years, so the Philippines was not directly handed to the Americans as long as they will fight and win the war. So the Philippine-American War began in February of 1899 and lasted until 1902. On May 28, 1898, the Filipino forces won their first victory in Alapan, Imus, Cavite. The newly made flag was hoisted in Lapan, then later unfurled at the Teatro Caviteño in Cavite Nuevo, or Cavite City, in front of the Filipinos and captured Spanish soldiers. A group of American officers and soldiers also witnessed the ceremony. And that's all about the important historical context. And now let's proceed to the author of the Acta Proclamation. And let's hear it from Roslyn Yanson.
Once again, good morning everyone. So now let's proceed to the author of Acta de la Proclamación de la Independencia del Pueblo Filipino. So although Ambrosio Rienzares Bautista was the actual author of the proclamation, but the initiator of the independence that led to the making of proclamation is General Emilio Aguinaldo. So most of us are familiar who is Emilio Aguinaldo, but to freshen up and deeper our understanding and knowledge about him, let me discuss further who is really Emilio Aguinaldo. Was he a traitor or a hero? So why do people hate him? If he was the first president of the Philippines, why do people think that he is bad? So, if you want to answer that questions, lend me your ears and focus on our discussion. General Emilio Aguinaldo was a Filipino revolutionary, a politician and a military leader who is officially recognized as the first and the youngest president of the Republic of the Philippines, and he was also the first president of a constitutional republic in Asia. Emilio Aguinaldo was born on March 22, 1869. He was born in Cavite El Viejo, or present-day known as Kawit, Cavite. His parents are Carlos J. Aguinaldo and Trinidad Fami Aguinaldo. The Aguinaldo family were known as a wealthy and influential family in Kawit, Cavite because of his father Carlos Aguinaldo, who was a gobernadorcillo for several terms. After his father's death in 1883, Emilio assisted his mother in their family business and helped to work earn the family income. And after then, Aguinaldo followed his father's footsteps to enter in politics, and he was chosen as a Capitan Municipal of Kawit in 1894. He then joined the Katipunan, choosing the name Magdalo. The Katipunan have another branch that called Magdiwang, which he set up in his own province. When the revolution began in 1896, the Katipunan in Cavite did everything to drive away the Spaniards, and luckily, they succeeded. However, the conflict soon arises because of territorial and logistical problem between the two groups that soon forced Aguinaldo to ask help from Supremo Andres Bonifacio. But because of Bonifacio's intervention, it worsened the situation. The only solution that they saw was to create a revolutionary government, the Pamahalaang Paghihimagsik was the revolutionary government that they created. On March 22, 1872, in Barrio Tejero, San Francisco de Malabon, or General Trias in present day, a meeting happened, in which it is intended to discuss a strategy on how to protect and how to defend the Cavite from the hand of Spanish army. Because during that time, Aguinaldo and his men were losing ground in Cavite. But then, they decided to have an election. In their election, Aguinaldo was elected as a president, and Mariano Trias as the vice president, Artemio Ricarte as the captain general, Emiliano Rego de Dios as the director of war, and Andres Bonifacio as the director of interior. But the election were disrupted after the protest of some men over Bonifacio's educational qualification for that such position. Then Bonifacio angrily declared that the election was null and void, and then he walked out. But the Magdalos considered the election valid and the new government was built and founded. After that incident, Bonifacio tried to build his own government, but he was arrested and found guilty. Supremo and his brother were executed on May 10, 1897. So based on our research, the election is fraudulent. It was forced upon the Filipino people because this happened without the consent or even the participation of the masses. And about in the person who insulted Bonifacio, it was really the men of Aguinaldo who disrupted, insult, and degrade Andres Bonifacio during the election. And they discredit him because he don't have a formal education and doesn't belong to the upper class society. Because of Bonifacio's death, the Katipunan weakened and the Spanish troops regained Cavite, and Aguinaldo and his men was forced to retreat to the mountain of Biak na Bato. After 333 years, Philippines was free again in the hand of Spaniards because of the help of the Americans. But the Filipinos soon realized that we are not yet free because the Americans will become our new colonizers. After the Americans defeated the Spaniards, the United States began to send fresh troops to the Philippines. 3 weeks later, the continuing friction with the Americans erupted into a conflict in February 1899. The Philippine-American War was armed conflict between the First Philippine Republic and the United States that lasted from February 4, 1899 up to July 2, 1902. While Filipino nationalists viewed the conflict as a continuation of the struggle for independence that began in 1896 with the Philippine Revolution. The war lasted in 3 years and eventually ended in 1901 with the capture of Aguinaldo. Soon after, he pledged allegiance to the United States and returned to private life on his family farm. He briefly had the limelight when he ran for the presidency of the Philippine Commonwealth, but lost to Manuel L. Quezon. Few years later, after the Philippine-American War, which the Americans won the victory, Japanese attacked the Philippines, and Aguinaldo was charged with collaboration by the Americans for helping the Japanese during the World War II. But later, he was freed in the general amnesty. He died at the age of 94 on February 6, 1964. So that's all about the author and some of the important events. And now, let's move on to the text of Acta de la Proclamación de la Independencia del Pueblo Filipino that would be reported by Manalin Compania.